3 years
Mm-hmm.
we've been working together.
Mm-hmm.
3 years we've been penetrating.
Please don't edit this. Very long pause there. Way too long. Were you trying to say penetrating each other or the market?
Yeah. We've been revolutionizing, I think, training in the care and services domain because you had something that nobody else had. I think others have tried it, and I think they had an idea of what they were after. They wanted complex motor skill, self-defense training to equal confidence, to equal fear management, and that's not what happened. That's not what happened. And then our friend in Great Britain, Andy McDonald, recently published the literature review of the training systems of the past 25 years, and there's no efficacy in how self-defense training makes healthcare staff safer. It's not improving outcomes, and it's definitive. I know what you had, but nobody describes what you had better than you. What was it that empowered you to want to carry a message of precisely how someone can be motivated and taught to manage fear, and as a result, do hard things? Because you just don't do this in the healthcare domain. You've done this in the force use domain. You've done this with people on an individual counseling level, coaching level, to overcome certain things. What inspired you and motivated you and empowered you to do this?
Fear. I mean, I grew up afraid of everything, and I was a scared athlete. I was scared in high school. I was scared of women. I was scared of dating. I was scared of business. And so and I tell people all the time that, if you figure it out, you become a full-time fear manager. And it's a joke I make in all the seminars now. You go to Costco and Walmart, and it's good. I like to speak to the manager and I remind people that, unless you're a unicorn, you have fear in your life almost every single day. And we don't realize it because we don't articulate it that way. We don't, if I'm getting dressed for a meeting and I look in the mirror and I go, no, not this, and I change. I go, this is fear of how I'm going to come across, how I'm going to be perceived. If I fix my hair, it's if I'm worried if I'm going to get this job, if I'm worried about my kids. And so I grew up with this fear, and I had no mentor, guardian, coach, trainer that ever said, hey, this is normal. But the other thing is, most people don't talk about fear, especially type A personalities,
right?
Which is you, me, and everybody. Everybody in care and services, they don't, I read, talking today to the group, everyone there, I said, you're all type A, right? And they're like, oh yeah, we are. And they accepted it. Like, if you want things to be better and you put
That's
yourself,
your definition. That's a beautiful definition.
And I don't like this like this. And it's not about being a control freak. It's about the efficacy, the truth, the improvement. And if you're trying to self-actualize at that level, you need to have a different level of self-awareness and different standards for yourself. And with that, especially in the world where we're judged by everything, the optics on everything are insane, especially these days. This whole fear management, and we've talked offline about this a lot, the whole no fear program is so grandiose, right? I think it could change the world. I think that if kids or parents were taught how to teach their kids how to change their relationship with fear, it would change the world. The there's, I can go on and on with this, but there was something you said earlier, leading up to the question about, Andy's work in the UK,
Yeah.
and efficacy. And I describe it as I say it a little bit differently without having done the research.
Yeah.
Like there's no evidence that what we're teaching manifests itself in a violent encounter. Most violent encounters, you see fear, you see scrambling, you see panic. You don't see complex motor skills.
Right.
And you said something in describing it. You said the other companies, for all their good meaning and well intentions, were trying to have a fear management system and a complex motor skill system. My intuition is that's not how it happened. It didn't start off with a good question, like Stephen Covey's "Begin with the End in Mind." I don't think it started off with a good question. I think you and I were working one day, and this guy attacked you, and you happened to have been, stationed in Okinawa during the war.
Right.
You learned martial arts, and you kicked his ass because he sucked.
There's truth to that.
Yeah.
There's a system, I won't name it, but there's a system that features the last name of its founder, and that person was a martial artist.
Well, all
served
of them are. All of them are, Andy. So I've done a lot of stuff in law enforcement, as you know, and I was teaching in law enforcement in the 90s, and I had people in my class who had, DT, defensive tactics,
Right.
is relatively new. It's just post Vietnam, and so early 70s, and what it was, and I had people who told me this. They go, the original defensive tactics training, you were told to show up with a gi.
Yeah.
And your duty belt over the top of it. So you'd be there like a judo gi with your ankles showing, and it was
a patrol belt.
Yeah, and it was all like complex motor skill, like attack me like this, and because that's how martial arts began, taught after the Boxer Rebellion, right?
Right.
Where we realized, my zig and zag aren't stopping bullets.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing when you dig into that history, and so people didn't say, how do we mitigate fear? And
I agree. They did not ask that question. I think it was a belief that as a byproduct of the complex motor skill training, that would somehow organically show up. And what you and I both know is that it doesn't.
Right. I think that, when I tell the story about getting jumped when I was 12 years old and telling my dad by two guys who were the high school up the street, and the fight started with, "Hey kid, when are you coming to high school?" "Oh, next year." "Oh, look at these two older kids talking to me. Woohoo! Hey, well, welcome to high school." And they went to shake hands, pulled me into full Nelson, beat me up, and I went home, and I wasn't going to go to high school. I'm not going to school. Like I didn't even start, and I'm already getting beaten up. And he said, "You got to learn how to defend yourself. You're going to go martial arts." And so I went full in thinking this would save me, but not once did the instructor ever say, "Let's talk about fear. Let's talk about the psychology of fear. Let's talk about the neurobiology." No, and nobody does. I stumbled onto it because I had lived intermittently every day of fear as a skier, as a gymnast, as a wrestler.
Right.
I would wrestle. I was really good athlete, all-around athlete.
Yeah.
I would ski. And I was, top of class. I was, the best on my team athletically, but I never won a race. I was wiped out. And because I was good and I showed up, because some people will go, "Oh, self-sabotage." It wasn't self-sabotage, and maybe I'm being, maybe it's semantics here. I showed up to win. I believed I could, but I was skiing so scared I could never hit a flow state. When I wrestled, I would worry about losing, not about winning, and letting down my team. So there's a whole different mindset of being up at bat going, don't strike out, even though you earned your spot on the team.
Right.
So it was really subtle. And a lot of my stuff, as you know, was just intuition. And I remember so many years later writing an article, and Chief Jeff Chudwin, very famous police officer out of Chicagoland, he quotes me all the time on this. I call it the 97-3 rule, that 97% of the people you meet will cooperate, acquiesce when you assert. 3% will go, I'm fighting you.
Right.
And it was something I said, we need to train for the 3%er, not the 97%. And that's what defensive tactics was doing. And so when somebody sucker punched a cop or grabbed his gun, they usually got their ass kicked because they were training for the wrong percentage.
Yeah.
And years later, I'm doing a gig for Gavin DeBecker's company.
Yep.
And they had brought me in. It was a private client. Obviously, I can't mention names. And they're sitting there in suits, and I'm there as a sub to DeBecker, right? So we're talking about principles and psychology and strategy, and it's wild. You don't know this story. And I'm sitting there, and I go, I call this the 97-3 rule. So what you're doing is when you train for 97% of the population, it guarantees that when somebody tries to ambush you, executive function will get hijacked. You're going to bypass all of your complex motor skills that you train because your limbic system is going to override the cognitive brain. And they're like, holy shit. And I go, yeah, I call this the 97-3 rule, where we need to train for the 3% of the person who's willing to injure or kill you to facilitate their escape. And they're going 97-3. And the guy says, where did you get that? And I'm sitting there. There are three guys in an office space with suits on. Where did you get that? And I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Because I made the number up.
Yep.
through intuition.
Yeah.
And I go like, and this is one of my greatest assets, but also my greatest flaws. I can't lie.
Yeah.
If you say to me, and I never do, and it gets me in a lot of trouble because, you'll go, hey, how's this look? And I go, oh, that's a great shirt. Where'd you get you go, oh, you're redirecting. What do you mean? I got to always tell the truth. So I go, yeah, man. So it was okay. And the guy's like looking at me and I'm going, oh man, this will be my last gig with these guys. And I go, so here's the deal. Like years ago when I was trying to think of a provocative way to say, this is who you need to be looking at.
Right. The minority of occurrences.
This is that 3% of the population represent 100% of the most dangerous attacks. Not the 9, and so all of these, well, step here, go to 2 o'clock, do that. That's for fasting protesters and the person mildly drunk going, I ain't going to jail.
Right.
But not the person who's willing.
Yeah. I love the way that you've described that, because the people we serve in Spear Care, the majority of their work is that smaller minority group because of the reason that people come together.
Well, this is what I always tell people is that, like, when you're working in a correctional facility, or that everyone in there is a 3%er, right? And so anyways, so here I am with these guys, and I go, okay, so how do I put this to you? And the guy's looking at me like, what's up? I go, so when I wanted to come up with something provocative, I like to come up with provocative ideas because then I make you think. Then that night in your hotel or in your bedroom, you're staring at your ceiling going, what did he mean by that? As opposed to just, I always say subject matter experts are people who've memorized other people's material. You want to be a substance matters. You want to know the why, deeply the why. And I said, so when I came up with this, I knew it wasn't 100% of the people. So I did this. I went 99-1, 98-2, 97-3, 96-4, and I decided 97-3 rolled off my tongue better.
So you said that
I said it to these guys, yeah. So I said I made it up because I wanted people to realize that it's a small percent. And
what did they say?
I don't know. It was amazing. The guy looks at me and he picks up his pen and he taps it on his pad. And he goes, so we did this, he said, we got access to this study that the FBI did over a 3-year period.
No way. So he's going to reveal,
So he goes, they did a multi-million-dollar study that showed when law enforcement made contact with, the perpetrator,
right,
that 96.4% of the time they complied. And 4.4% of the time, 3.4% of the time, there was a fight.
So
Somebody
your
tried to run.
intuition was validated
So
by.
I look at the guy, he goes, huh, have you heard about the FBI study? We have access to it. Blah, blah. And he goes, they got 96.4. And he looked at me like, do you find that interesting? And I looked at him and I went, well, they're off by 0.4, but not right. But it was so funny, Andy. It was like this, I think it was a 2-year study that they spent $4 million on. But there's a lot of things like that, like the way I taught self-defense. I said, let's train off balance on purpose all the time. Let's figure out ways to be emotionally, psychologically, and physically off balance in our training.
No one does that but you, Tony. No one does that but you in the care and services sector. I've never known anyone to construct the most thoughtful learning design around those moments that truly impart to the student a new capacity to manage and regulate fear while engaging in something that, generally speaking, is high risk, but they're doing it to a high degree of capability, or much higher than they had when they come into the classroom. It makes me want to ask you, for the benefit of our viewers, why should someone in mobile crisis, co-response, healthcare, behavioral health, corrections, or even in workplace violence prevention, security in buildings? You know, we've had some conversations about some businesses that we're working with in Seattle where people living with homelessness and substance use are coming into common areas and engaging staff and engaging other patrons, and they require support to be moved along. Why should someone take no fear?
There's a bunch of reasons. Number one, fear is contagious, and a really smart predator can read that fear, and so they can manipulate your behavior at a much higher level if they're picking up that type of energy. But there's more important reasons. So a fear spike triggered by a perception of danger or actual danger impacts you at a physiological level.
Mm-hmm.
And so the speed of the startle response, the speed of the fear spike, it does a couple of things. One, if it's danger close, I mentioned this earlier,
Yep.
that like sudden danger will hijack executive function, bypass your cognitive brain, limbic system, reactive brain, respond. So you could be a wax on, wax off master, and all of a sudden someone jumps across at you,
Right.
and it's startle response. Understanding, so no fear does a bunch of things. The no fear program, obviously spelled KNOW. The idea there is, first of all, there's no such thing as NO fear. There's only this idea of if I change my relationship with fear, I have now improved my self-awareness. If I improve my self-awareness, I improve my critical thinking. If I improve my self-awareness and critical thinking, I have greater access to real-time situational awareness. This is like nerdy level, so simple. And I always tell people that if situational awareness was the answer, because all experts go, SA, situational awareness, head on
Right.
swivel, left to bang. And we have a maximum, of course, no awareness, no chance. If situational awareness was just the answer, you could do a situational awareness course and you would never be caught off guard.
That's right.
You would never be
That's right.
compromised. But the truth of the matter is some very dangerous people, highly trained people, have been kidnapped, captured, dropped, because situational awareness is a conscious cognitive skill. You need to be awake, you need to know what you're looking for, and if I'm guarding you and then I know my shift's up and I do this for a second, you just jump me. Right?
Yeah. Or if you're helping someone or whatever.
There's a million things. It's called life.
Yeah.
And so the startle response kicks in when our situational awareness is compromised. There's no conscious thought. No one ever thought, I should flinch now. This is coming in my head really quickly.
Right.
The whole no fear program gives the end user greater access to this. So it's almost like unpacking the operating system that is to be a human weapon, to be able to protect yourself and optimize yourself for sudden violence. And it's neat, but there's at least 3 different tracks in the complete no fear program.
Right.
One of them is improving my life by understanding how to self-regulate, so that I know. So if I'm in all of the communities that you listed have a moral, ethical, legal mandate to de-escalate.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you can work in correction or you work in care and services, there's a moment in law enforcement. There is a period we call D2 diffuse,
Right.
where de-escalation is key. Now, two things happen there. If I'm dysregulated, I can't access, let's say, the skills that verbal craft teaches. If I'm dysregulated, then depending on the level and the scenario of the person in front of me, they have me.
Yes.
Right. I'm wrapped around their finger, and they're now manipulating my behavior.
That's right.
And this changes, and so we all know what PTSD is. Have you heard my other acronym for PTSD? There's post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
And then there's pre-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Right. And it's a really fascinating conversation, because it's like if you and I have an interaction and you make me nervous and then you start to control my behavior. So, like let's say you're the resident or the client.
Right.
And you've got me and you lean towards me now.
Yeah.
So lean towards me. And I go, so listen, and I'm now like you're doing that, and this individual is having fun.
Right.
The next time I've got to go counsel or have like my heart is going, because I know at an unconscious or conscious level, this person is doing something with me.
Tony, we have seen people in care and services, well-paid clinicians, psychiatrists, social workers, master's level psychologists, counselors, fall into that pattern. Mm-hmm. There's a belief within the employer that somehow the credential or the certification should be an insurance policy against that phenomena. Mm-hmm. It isn't. Mm-hmm. And then decisions can be made for a person in the service of their treatment or even in terms of their safety and rights that is not what's best because it's being driven by fear.
Yeah.
If I had to be specific, I can't tell you how many times I've been around a psychiatrist who ordered seclusion or restraint for the presentation of stress in a patient or behavior that did not meet an imminent risk criteria. In other words, so he's holding a cup of urine and saying he's going to throw it if anybody comes near him. Now we have to go tackle this person and escort them to a bed and anchor them to it because this is what you want us to do, because you feel afraid, because he don't like you. Like this goes on. And you have placed your finger on something profound, that fear is in the wheelhouse of our caregivers, of our parents, of some of our people in school who are making decisions that are controlling other people in a way that we are not helping the person or the environment around the person.
This is, I mean, it's every conversation I try to drive. When you learn to manage fear versus mismanage fear, your life can change. Studying fear in yourself, getting to know fear, automatically changes your self-awareness. It doesn't mean you're better. It just is, it's this decision to look at the fear. And when you start to do that, it changes your critical thinking, right? I said
tremendously. There's a whole domain of thought now on predictive thinking that I think your work has dots that connect to that. The business of fear and what you're predicting or anticipating. When you manage this, can completely change what one may predict instead.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to.
It's worth a look. It's kind of it's on the edge. Predictive brain. It's
so there's I'll take a look at it, but the concept for me, I try to keep it very tic-tac-toe, very simple, and that is, if I'm afraid, like every single class I asked, like today, there were 30 people in the class. How many of you send your food back without fail if it's not cooked properly or doesn't taste good?
All right. Nobody raises their hand.
There were 2 people in the class. And that's consistent. 1, 2, 3. And I always make the joke. I go, well, why wouldn't you send your food back? You're paying for it. Just say to the waiter, hey, this sucks. This, like, I ordered medium rare. This is well done. Whatever it is. And people, they go, because as kids, we saw the movie where someone spits in the food or, tampers with it.
Right.
And I go, you're a grown adult, maybe with a PhD, and you're not sending your steak back or your fish back because of fear.
Right.
You don't want to get up and talk because of fear. You don't want to assert what you're with somebody who's passive aggressive or says something that you feel was crossed the line or disrespectful, but you're
like
worried
you do all the time with me. But.
Right. But I'm trying to keep this PG-13. I challenged the group that I was working with today. I said, the next time I see you and I ask the question, who here returns their food? I want to see all your hands up, because how you learn to manage fear is by practicing courage.
Yep.
And you practice courage not by waiting for a catastrophic event, or what do you call it? There's a term.
Seminal event, like sentinel event.
Yeah. Just, you don't wait for that. Like if I'm afraid of climbing mountains, I don't go, oh, Tony's right. Okay, book me for Everest. Start with the hill down the street, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you practice courage, because the mind navigates the body. There's no such thing in the literal sense of muscle memory. We need to create a neural pattern, but you don't make decisions to do something unless you can manage your fear. Yes. So if I say, hey, we should all go for a run, if you're afraid of running, you're going to come up with an excuse not to. And we end up telling ourselves, you've seen, the play on words, rationalize with a hyphen. We tell ourselves the rational lie. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is Richard Feynman. He says, the first principle is to never fool yourself.
Yeah.
And remember, you're the easiest person to fool.
Yeah. So
we tell ourselves the story of why we're not going to engage or do this or get this training or what have you. But the No Fear program it's way deeper. Number one, personal evolution, self-actualization. You're not going to become the best version of yourself if you allow fear to manipulate you. And you're doing it in the Richard Feynman level. You're going, well, I'm not going to do that because that's stupid. Why would I do that? And you tell yourself the story. Professionally, everything in your career, all of the challenges and choices you make are almost always influenced by fear. I've never been in a situation with anybody, and people don't use the word fear.
No, they will avoid it because there's a image
Stigma
attached to identifying with it that people don't want to project.
Yeah.
And they'll refer to it as anxiety, apprehension.
Not even that, Andy. They'll be, it's the rational lie. It's hey, you should go do that big thing there where you're talking in front of 500 people. And you go, what's the point of that? It's not even like, they won't say I'm afraid of public speaking. It'll be the date's not good, and what's the point? When you peel the big fear onion, you get to the point where if you can identify exactly what you're afraid of, then you can come to the point where you go, if I do this, it will be good for me. And this is one of the most potent elements in the No Fear program is reminding people that there are lots of things they need to do afraid. That if you're waiting to feel no fear, N-O, you're going to wait a long time.
Yeah, that's the one of the golden takeaways, I think, from No Fear and Spear Care. The idea that one can feel these feelings, these impulses, and still do something courageous, deliberate, calculated. In other words, the idea that you're waiting for some Jedi state as if there is no impulsive fear at all is very unrealistic. You would refer to it as the unicorn. Let me ask you a different question, Tony. In our work together for 3 years, you've been in care and services a lot more. How has your relationship with Jumpstart and me influenced the way you and your team express certain ideas then and now?
Obviously, there had to be an entire re-education and rethinking. Going back, before I fully answer that, going back almost 40 years when I was training trainers in the late 80s.
Yep. And I was reading about you in the magazines. In other words, like,
Crazy.
I've known you that long.
There's a gentleman in the class today that goes, he said, I have been following you for 30 years in the martial arts. He says, I could just never afford to get to a seminar. I can't believe you. When Keith told me you were here, holy shit.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I would tell, when we first started training trainers, I would say, if your audience doesn't get it, it's your fault. You need to figure out who they are and then articulate language in a way that they get it. That if I say I bought you a present, and let's say it's an old analog alarm clock, and it's so cool, Andy, but I don't have any wrapping paper, and I find, I'll just use this bag here, and it's like a bag with some oil stains on it, and I can't talk to you in person because I'm late, and I go, Andy, open as soon as possible, and you open the door, and you hear tick, 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 tick,
Yeah.
and it's wrapped in newspaper with oil stains. You're going, that's a bomb. You're not going, it's a gift, right?
Yeah.
So your delivery is huge. And what we realized is that your community's language completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the people on our team come from law enforcement or military. So, someone gets in your face, you're going, okay, let's go. And it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is a therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, we have to have lunch with this person 30 minutes
from
now.
You're going to see this person later today or tomorrow. You're not throwing them in. He's all yours now.
Yeah.
And throw him in the back of a car.
Right.
Different, like words, like one of our most important graphics that we teach the entire, like this 30,000 foot view of this violence loves speed and trying to understand it, was called Timeline of Violence, and sitting there going, let's change that to timeline of escalation.
Oh, yes.
Right? So there are all these, I'd be looking at you, I go, hey man, what are you looking at? You got a problem with me? Now I'd say this person was presenting aggression.
Right.
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 It's fascinating.
It doesn't look like a time bomb anymore. It doesn't look like a ticking bomb. It looks like a care and services thing. Now, the substance hasn't changed at all.
Well, the science hasn't changed and the substance hasn't changed.
Right.
And that's really one of the beautiful things about like the journey is I can literally be here this week working care and services and then go to a special operations team next week.
Right.
They still need to understand how to convert the startle response.
Yep.
They still need to understand that situational awareness can be compromised, that if they can't clear the fear like clearing a stovepipe, right, they can't access the weapon system even if they're holding it.
Right.
There's a malfunction there. The mind navigates the body, and you don't access your psychomotor skills because there's no muscle memory when that mechanism is being hijacked. And sudden violence hijacks that. And this is just neuroscience.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating that I can literally work with all these different demos. So someone asked me, how do you work with a soccer mom? How do you work with special operations? How do you work with care and services, fire and rescue? And I go, because they're all humans and they're all connected by neurobiology, kinesiology, psychology.
Yeah.
That's it.
Tony, nobody's done what you're doing and we're doing. For the first time ever, we're moving students through a continuum, a proper continuum of managing the fear impulse, training them with an experience of what it's like to convert the startle flinch impulse to something deliberate, encouraging them to rest confidently in that because it's going to occur without direct thought. They can rely on that to happen. And as a result, that will empower them to lean into more complex thinking to engage in deliberate de-escalation skill where we're projecting a model of self-control that leads someone to self-control. or as Andy McDonald would say, you're engaging in a co-regulating process. You're demonstrating that because you're together and with it, even in the presentation of their chaos, that can inspire them to get with it and re-regulate.
It's all like fear is contagious, so is courage.
Yes.
And so
yes,
the neat thing at like a simpler level for me is this idea, like I always say, you alluded to it before, that was the first things I said to you when I started to understand what you saw, was that how can you possibly lean into de-escalation if you're in fear of
getting
harmed,
the shit beat out of you. Yeah.
And so the answer wasn't for me in learning a hard style martial art and getting, spending years getting a black belt and what have you. It was,
you got one?
No, it was the thesis statement of the SPEAR system. And SPEAR, for people who don't know, it's an acronym for spontaneous protection, enabling accelerated response. So it was the study of the body's survival system, specifically the startle response, and was there a way to convert that into a protective mechanism that we lovingly refer to as your biological airbag?
Yes, I love that.
And so if we then connected that to and I've been teaching de-escalation since the 80s, right? We had nonviolent postures, this Trojan horse metaphor.
Since then, choice speech. You've been talking about this for a long time.
Decades, way before it became the buzzword, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would always tell people, hey, morally, ethically, legally, you need to de-escalate. If push comes to shove, you need to protect yourself. It's a choiceless choice. Mm-hmm. How do you anchor yourself while you focus on the de-escalation?
Yes.
Because particularly guys, if you're posturing, I will mirror that. So if you're pointing at me, I'll blade. If you go, I'm going to kick your ass, I'll go, I don't want to fight. And now suddenly we're...
Right, but there's a whole neurobiological communication going on.
Unconscious.
Yep.
And things are escalating, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, energy. And so this whole idea is, how do I look like the Trojan horse as a metaphor? How do I listen, Andy, seriously, I don't want any trouble. When you learn the 4 classic nonviolent postures, you immediately anchor to the airbag.
Yes.
And you self-regulate.
Yes.
And when you connect that to no fear, particularly the language that says, there are things in life you need to do afraid. De-escalating somebody who's presenting aggression
may be one of them.
Well, not maybe, must be. If you said to me, I'm never afraid when somebody's threatening my life, I would say you're in the wrong business, because you will become complacent or cavalier, and both of those are going to get you hit one day.
Fair enough.
So
there are some people who have to deal with that so often, though. You would almost wonder how their needle doesn't move. But I appreciate what you're saying.
But I would still grab them
and say, "Hey, don't become alarm complacent." Right.
Well, this came up in today's class where I said, "Hey, how you think affects how you feel affects how you think. Both influence when you move. If you become complacent, that person will pick that up, and then one day the story will be." Yeah. I've known him for 3 years. Nothing ever happened that really shocked me when he stabbed me or hit me or bit me or whatever.
That is all true.
And so I don't want, and this is such a neat concept, I don't want people hypervigilant going into everything.
Right.
And so that's where having a personal safety system that is triggered by a non-conscious movement when your situational awareness is compromised is wildly genius.
Yes.
I'm not saying I'm the genius. Us as humans are.
They are.
We.
But you can be. You can. I will say it. That is your genius. I mean, as much as I'm teasing you because we're friends now, but that is your genius. There is a balance between hypervigilance, and I can see how certain personalities would be hypervigilant and then go find something else to do, because the need to be hypervigilant because of how they're wired all the time makes work not fun anymore, makes it a job they don't want to go to. And you're an answer for that person. You don't need to be that way. Right. Here's why. And then, or the other side of that spectrum, of course, is someone like we're talking about.
I'm more of a good information never displaces other good information. If you're a human living on the planet Earth, then understanding more about fear as a commodity. Fear, for the longest time, forever, for the history of the world, fear is looked at as the enemy.
Yep.
As opposed to
Fuel.
fear is the energy, not the enemy. And you use it as energy, it becomes your fuel. At certain levels, it might be like investigative fuel. Why am I afraid of this? And now I'm on YouTube. I'm going to therapy. I'm getting a coach. I'm
Right, which is
training.
curiosity, novelty circuitry. In other words, your messaging about accepting fear stimulates parts of the brain that generally are not stimulated because someone does not know what to do with it. You're the guy who, for the first time in recent history, has inspired people to observe fear, not just experience fear or avoid fear. To observe fear while experiencing fear, which is an entirely new capacity in a human being.
There was a distinction that I made, I don't remember what it was, a few decades ago, where all the research on fear. So remember, I grew up with all this fear, so fear was everywhere.
Right.
And then when I started teaching self-defense in the 80s, I started to notice we were doing like Fight Club before Fight Club was a movie. We'd get together once a month and beat the crap out of each other, film it, old VHS videos. And there was always tremendous fear. And people, it was literally like guys.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, guys would come in, bouncers, cops, they'd hear about this. And occasionally we get like somebody that was going, man, what are they doing here? And like a small woman, they'd say, hey, I'm hoping this is cathartic, but I was raped many years ago, and then they'd fight like a badger. And I'm like, and I started noticing people who I thought, oh, this guy's going to kick ass, and he'd like tap out or run away or whatever. And I started really going like, what is going on? It was like suddenly realizing the people who manage their fear are the ones that manage to fight.
I love that expression.
It doesn't guarantee victory, but it guarantees you're in the fight.
And something that you point out also, Tony, which is so true. You're able to leave the encounter knowing that you laid it all out on the table, that you did fight back, that even if you lost, it's easier to accept the outcome that way as opposed to living with regret that you did nothing.
Didn't even try. So it was during the 80s that I said, you know what, all these sports psychology books that I was looking at, trying to understand fear, were always about some meditative state, some kumbaya, some, and I said, you know what, and it was just like an intuition that hit me. Everyone's focusing on fight, flight, freeze, post-mortem, forensic, what happened there. And I said, I need something that is guiding me, narrating in real time. And then it occurred to me that the focus was always on neurobiology or physiology, heart rate, sweaty palms, butterfly, vertical breathing, dilated, tachypsyche, auditory exclusion, all these survival learning research terms. And I was like, I just need somebody in my head saying, run, go, fight, like he's open there. And so I realized, and one day I said, there's a difference between the biology of fear and the psychology of fear. And the only thing that matters in inspiring performance is the psychology. What is your self-talk?
Yes.
What are you thinking? And that's when I started to create psychobehavior, the whole fear loop principle, and all
the timeline of escalation, all that stuff.
All of that. And so that's going back decades, for the original iteration. But it was that distinction of when you say to me, I'm really afraid of this, I'm asking you, what's the movie in your mind? What do you see that's happening, right? So the acronym I love, false expectations appearing real. It's when I'm visualizing something in the future that's debilitating me.
Predictive thinking, it's beautiful. And people come to healthcare and care and services not expecting to feel afraid. They come anticipating that they're living their life's purpose because they want to help people, and that people who need help will present gratitude and appreciation. And then they come to the discipline, they come to the sector, and they learn that in the places where the help is needed the most, this is not the response from the people served. Of course, there are going to be occasions where people express gratitude and they remember you and they're appreciative for your help. But very often, they're not interested in it. They feel at the mercy of an uncaring system. The system itself has conditioned them to fear and apprehension and in-group, out-group with the caregivers, and it's very challenging to create a therapeutic milieu. And if you have employees in there that have the responsibility to lead people to self-regulation when they present anger, aggression, and discontrol, they can very easily get afraid of the enterprise of doing that because it puts them at near contact distance with all kinds of messages to their nervous system that this isn't safe. I could potentially be hit. I don't want to get injured. Susie, the nurse, had her teeth busted out or her head stomped on the ward last week. I don't want that to happen to me. Work shouldn't hurt. Let me call labor. We need to do a demand to bargain. It all comes from that, from fear and the outcomes associated with very, very unfortunate interactions where good-meaning people who are afraid might be able to de-escalate, but very often don't resort to that and resort to the use of control that someone's going to resist and then somebody gets hurt. And it happens all the time. So this is the way out. Spear care and verbal craft, in my view, are the way out of that mess of outcomes that have been revealed in the literature review now, where our training approach for the last 20 years has just not worked. And I couldn't be more grateful to be on this journey with you about it. I think we're doing something that's just never been done. And more people need to know about it.
Well, I mean, you know how I hate to compliment you. This this wouldn't happen if you hadn't seen the diamond in the rough, right?
Yep.
And saw that. So, you reached out to me on LinkedIn, and the rest is history. And one day I'll tell the actual story. But no, it was it was a artistic challenge to get started because my focus was like way different, and but I've come to love it, and I've come to I think I told you, and I told my last class here last month was the most fun I had teaching in 10 years. The last 10 years, it was just wild. There was something. It's always about the students. And you've heard me use the Latin expression "qui docet decet." Mm-hmm. That's Latin for those who teach learn. And so, it reminded me of why I got started and why I love coaching so much is, we live certainly in uncertain times, and they always have been.
Yep.
Whether you're a caveman or up to now, like stuff can change like that. Mm-hmm. And only the people who manage their fear manage to fight. And so if you want to survive, and this is something that eluded me for a long time. We've got about 80 different programs in our company. Yep. And if somebody said, "Oh, you got all of these like sexy, cool programs that do this, multiple assailant and
you do. You do have a full suite of products,
right?
Yeah.
And if someone said you can only teach one program,
that's it.
The rest of your days, it would be no fear. There's so much evidence of people that are highly trained at complex motor skills that fail to rise to the occasion, not because they weren't skilled or courageous, but because they were surprised. And no one ever said, if you're not training for the 3%er, right? Then that's where you can get caught, because sudden violence is always personal. Sudden violence will put you off balance. Yep. And, there, of course, the contrarian will say, well, what about this? Or I know this guy, but that's the unicorn or the anomaly event. There's a ton of evidence that that's not what happens in the real world.
True. Let's do the Tango and Cash handshake.
Is that it?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this time. It's a blessing to work with you.
Thank you.
And learn more about spear care and verbal craft by visiting, just by Googling Tony Blauer and going to his website, or coming to jumpstartmastery.com.